Telltale's The Walking Dead seemed to come out of nowhere in 2012 and immediately blew everyone away. I remember seeing reviews coming out with near perfect scores and thinking I should probably try it myself, but at the time I was pretty much only into Call of Duty and eventually I forgot all about The Walking Dead. Jump cut to 6 years later and it was you guys who are watching this now who convinced me I should move it to the top of my priority list, and I can't thank you enough for that because overall it's been an incredible journey and I'm so glad that I finally experienced it. So, let's go through the seasons one by one and talk about what they did well and what I would have liked to be different. Season 1 introduced us to our player character Lee and Clementine, a girl we took under our wing when it was clear no one else was coming to help her. Lee had some secrets as he was on his way to prison at the time of the outbreak, so we knew that he'd be the kind of guy who could probably handle himself in this new world. I made my Lee a kind and generous man for the most part, but I loved how he wasn't stuck in one role and I could take darker paths when I thought it was necessary, for example, by leaving no one alive at the farm. That was still the right choice, by the way. The way the characters react to your choices and how your relationships can unfold totally differently depending on what you do is fantastic. It made me care more and think long and hard before making decisions that could have a lasting impact on the people around me. Speaking of the people around me, there were some great characters in the first season, and overall I think they were probably the most memorable group of the whole series. Kenny became my one true bro despite his flaws, and although I found Duck annoying initially, it was heartbreaking to see him bitten because of how I knew it would affect Kenny. Losing both Katya and Duck at the same time was a crazy reminder of the world we were in, and that came in an episode where we'd already seen Carly get shot and killed out of nowhere. Through it all though, the character I cared most about was always Clem. The writers did a fantastic job in making the relationship between Lee and Clem believable, and the moments they shared were some of the highlights of the whole season. Having her snooze on my shoulder on the way to the train, teaching her to defend herself and cutting her hair were all great scenes that deepened their bond in meaningful ways. As for complaints with the first season, there were a few technical hitches which continue to be an issue every season, but aside from them, the only annoyance I can remember that stands out was my inability to keep Molly in the group. She escaped the zombies and was never heard from again, which seems such a shame for such a good character. Next, we have 400 Days. Was it necessary to play like Telltale claimed? This was almost entirely pointless DLC. Fine for what it was, but containing none of the character development or meaningful choices that we're looking for due to its short runtime. So moving on to Season 2, we have a time jump and are now playing as Clem, which feels great after spending all of Season 1 getting to know her. The first episode isn't hugely memorable, however the reveal that Kenny lived in Episode 2 was one of the absolute high points of the series, and one which I doubt they'll actually ever be able to top. The rest of the season moved around a lot, introducing and then removing multiple enemies, however the main focus through it all was the downfall of Kenny. The writers lean heavily on the relationship you had with him in Season 1, and it worked great for me. Even when he'd cross some lines, I'd still side with him because, well, he's Kenny. Slowly, however, he becomes hardened after losing his new love and eventually starts turning abusive. The final choice we have to make between Kenny and Jane would have been a simple one were it not for all the history we had together. Instead, it was heartbreaking, and although I ended up killing Kenny, I came so close to taking another path. Kenny's death probably marks the lowest point in Clem's life so far, and just as how his reintroduction is probably the highest point the writers will reach, I don't think they'll ever be able to craft something as depressing as that choice again. As for the negatives of Season 2, there were a few things that just didn't sit right with me. Luke's death especially felt wrong at the time, like he should have easily been able to just escape the zombies' grasp. Luke was one of my favourite characters, but his death left me feeling disappointed, not sad. It was also fairly disappointing that none of the large group of characters we met in Episode 1 survived through to the end of Episode 5. All were systematically killed off, with Luke being the last one to bite the dust, which just seemed like a shame and a little bit of a waste to me. And of course, I guess we should mention the 400 Days crew, who we saw almost none of aside from Bonnie. Knowing her backstory was slightly interesting, but it had no relevance to the season at all, and the other group members were barely seen. Aside from those issues though, it was overall another fantastic season and a real blast to play through. So, finally we move on to the black sheep of the series, Season 3, A New Frontier. I really feel like they must have had a totally different team working on this one. Immediately, my first complaint is that we don't get to play as Clem. I mean, we do a little bit, but she's not the main character. That was fine in Season 1 when she was a little kid and we were helping her learn how to survive, but after spending an entire season as her, It felt wrong that she'd be pushed to the side in favour of a new group. After a quick bit of research, it turns out that Telltale have gone on record saying this was done to try and appeal to new players so that they don't feel the need to have played the first 2 seasons to know what's going on. And in response, I would like to say, fuck that. People should absolutely have to catch up the same way I did. The first 2 seasons are amazing, so the more people that play them the better. But to spoil the journey of Clem that the fans are invested in just to appeal to newcomers is something I find really shitty. The new time jump is fine, we did that with Season 2 as well, but for God's sake, let us play as Clem still. This led to situations where Clem was saying or doing things that weren't in keeping with who she was in my playthroughs, and it was really annoying to watch things unfold in ways that I wouldn't have chosen. The characters she was replaced with were fine. They were fine. But they were nowhere near as great as Clem is, and I was far less interested in the story as a result. Speaking of the story, it was aiming for a dramatic family drama kind of thing, but in reality it was nowhere near as compelling as previous seasons. I tried to get into character as Javi to care more about what was going on, but in the end I can't say I was too fussed about how things turned out. The fact that David's death happened off-screen is absolutely mind-blowing to me after how much the writers hinged the entire season on his relationship to Javi. And then Gabe's death was over within 5 seconds and we were straight back in town fixing things and preparing for the future as though nothing had happened. It just felt like shoddy writing to me. Likewise, the death of Jane felt incredibly cheap, as though the writers couldn't be bothered to find a good reason to move Clem's story forward, and so they just killed Jane off. There's no way the Jane I got to know in Season 2 would have left Clem and baby AJ to fend for themselves. Similarly, it turns out if you save Kenny at the end of Season 2 instead, they kill him off in the flashbacks too. This makes the massive decision at the end of Season 2 seem pretty much pointless, as no matter what you choose, you can't save either of them really. Season 3 was also the shortest and the most buggy of all the seasons. At one point, Javi's arm spread out across the entire width of the screen and stayed that way in every scene until I reloaded the game. It felt as though this season just wasn't that special to the devs, as though they made it and threw it out into the world to make money without really caring about it. However, despite all these things, I am still glad I played Season 3 and got to see the next stage of Clem's life in the apocalypse, but I really hope the final season later this year has some actual passion behind it from the devs, and that it's a fitting end to the story. So, the one remaining question then is whether Season 1 or Season 2 is the best. Personally, although Season 2 had the happiest and saddest moments, I think the first season just about edges it out. Lee is a fantastic character and the whole cast of the first season is far more memorable than what comes later. But that's just my opinion, so let me know in the comments what you think, which season is your favourite and why. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next series starting very soon.